In 1952, a country star walked onto the Grand Ole Opry stage wearing a glittering rhinestone suit instead of the standard cowboy getup. The audience gasped. Hank Williams had just been banned for alcoholism, and here was this new artist, deliberately breaking every unwritten rule of country music's most sacred stage. Porter Wagoner stood under those harsh lights, his suit catching every beam and throwing it back at the audience like a disco ball in a honky-tonk. The Opry's old guard watched in horror. This wasn't just about clothes, it was about money, power, and who got to decide what country music looked like. Back then, country stars wore plain Western suits, cowboy hats, and kept things simple. That was the rule. But Wagoner had spotted something during his early days, performing in butcher shops and grocery stores. People remembered the sparkle. While other artists worried about blending in, he made sure you couldn't look away. The genius wasn't just in the flash. Wagoner understood television was coming, and those rhinestones would pop on black and white screens like nothing else. He learned this lesson performing at a small TV station in Missouri, where he noticed viewers wrote in about what performers wore almost as much as what they sang. When color TV arrived, he doubled down, adding electric blues and fierce reds to his wardrobe. Other artists called him a sellout, but Porter was playing chess while they played checkers. Nudie Cohn, the tailor behind these revolutionary suits, became country music's secret weapon. A Jewish immigrant who'd started out making G-strings for burlesque dancers, Nudie understood spectacle. His suits told stories in thread and rhinestone, cacti, wagon wheels, musical notes, all hand-stitched onto gabardine. Soon, artists realized that Wagoner wasn't just peacocking, he was building a brand. Those suits could cost more than a new car, but they paid for themselves in publicity. Every rhinestone told the audience, this isn't your grandfather's country music. The transformation sparked a visual arms race in country music. Ernest Tubb traded his cowboy hat for a business suit. Webb Pierce bought a guitar-shaped swimming pool and covered his Bonneville convertible in silver dollars. Even the traditionalist Carl Smith started wearing embroidered suits. The old Nashville establishment watched in dismay as their simple, rural image transformed into a sparkling spectacle. Wagoner's rebellion went beyond aesthetics. He turned his weekly television show into a testing ground for breaking more rules. In an era when country shows stuck to safe, familiar formats, he experimented with camera angles, staging, and lighting. He gave screen time to unknown artists, betting on raw talent over established names. When executives complained about his showcasing black R&B acts, he threatened to walk. Knowing his ratings gave him leverage. The real power of Wagoner's rhinestone revolution lay in its timing. As television began reaching into rural homes, he gave country music a visual language that could compete with rock and roll. Those sparkles didn't just catch the light, they caught the imagination of a new generation of performers who realized that success in country music didn't have to mean playing by the old rules. While Wagoner fought his battle with rhinestones in Nashville, another kind of rebellion was brewing in Texas. There, a clean-cut former disc jockey named Willie Nelson was about to prove that sometimes you had to leave Nashville entirely to change country music forever. His rebellion wouldn't sparkle. It would smoke. Willie Nelson stared at his Billboard charts over a cup of black coffee in 1970. His songs were hits, but only when other people recorded them. Nashville's top producers had a clear message. His voice was too weird, his timing was too loose, and his guitar playing didn't fit their formula. The final straw came when RCA released his concept album, Yesterday's Wine, with a cover showing him as a pig in a suit. The message was clear: get in line or get out. Nashville had turned country music into an assembly line. Artists would show up to the studio, sing over pre-recorded backing tracks, and let producers shape their sound into something radio stations would play. They called it the Nashville sound. Strings instead of fiddles, smooth vocals instead of twang, and every rough edge polished away. Artists who complained were quietly blacklisted. So Willie did something unthinkable. He paid off his mounting debts by playing gigs in Texas dive bars, let his clean-cut Nashville hair grow long, and started hanging out with hippies in Austin. The same qualities Nashville rejected. His jazz-influenced guitar playing, his behind-the-beat phrasing, made him a hero to the cosmic cowboys of Texas's capital city. He recorded Red-Headed Stranger for $4,000, using his touring band instead of session musicians. Columbia Records hated it, but the album went platinum. Waylon Jennings watched Willie's success with growing interest. He'd been fighting his own battles with RCA Records, demanding to use his road band instead of session musicians. Every time he walked into the studio, producers would hand him pre-selected songs and tell him exactly how to sing them. The music had all the soul of a corporate memo. The breaking point came after a devastating fire at Jennings' home studio. Rather than return to RCA's controlling environment, he mortgaged his future to build a new studio. There he recorded Dreaming My Dreams, with his own band, creating a sound that mixed honky-tonk soul with rock and roll's energy. The producers were horrified as these recordings were too raw, too real, but Waylon had a simple response: release the music as is, or he'd quit. The label blinked first. This rebellion found its headquarters at Tom Paul Glaser's studio, dubbed Hillbilly Central. Located in an old house on 19th Avenue South, it became the anti-establishment's answer to Music Row. Artists would record at all hours, experimenting with sounds that would have given Nashville producers heart attacks. The studio had a no-tie policy and a well-stocked bar. More importantly, it had freedom. Billy Joe Shaver became the movement's poet laureate. His songs like Old Five and Dimers and Georgia on a Fast Train spoke to every artist who'd ever been told they were too rough around the edges. When Waylon recorded an entire album of Shaver's songs, it proved that authentic songwriting could still find its audience. Even Bobby Bare, who'd played Nashville's game for years, managed to wrestle creative control from RCA, proving that established stars could break free too. The music these outlaws created didn't just challenge Nashville's sound, it rewrote country music's entire storyline. Instead of string sections and vocal choruses, they used stripped-down arrangements that emphasized the raw emotion in their voices. Their lyrics traded pastoral fantasies for hard truths about drugs, divorce, and the dark side of fame. The characters in their songs weren't heroes and villains. They were complex people living complicated lives. The movement reached its commercial peak with Wanted, The Outlaws in 1976. The album featured Willie, Waylon, Tom Paul Glaser, and Jesse Coulter, becoming country music's first platinum-selling album. Nashville couldn't ignore success like that. Suddenly, the same labels that had fought against artistic freedom were searching their rosters for more outlaws to sign. But success came with its own price tag. As major labels tried to manufacture more outlaws, they created the very kind of formula the movement had fought against. New artists showed up in Nashville wearing fake beards and denim jackets, hoping to cash in on the outlaw image. Corporate Nashville had learned to sell rebellion, but they still hadn't learned to trust their artists. While Willie and Waylon were breaking Nashville's rules about creative control, another artist was challenging country music's deepest and most troubling traditions. When Charlie Pride walked into RCA's Studio B, he wasn't just fighting for creative freedom, he was fighting for the right to exist in country music at all. His battle would shake Nashville's foundations even more than the Outlaws ever did. The first time Charlie Pride's record played on country radio, no one mentioned his skin color. His label, RCA, had deliberately avoided sending photos to stations. But when Pride showed up for his first major performance, the audience fell silent. Standing on stage at Detroit's famous Olympia Stadium, Pride faced 10,000 people who'd never seen a black man sing country music. He opened with his hit, Just Between You and Me. 3 minutes later, the crowd was on their feet. Pride had studied every note of Ernest Tubb and Roy Acuff's records, mastering the traditional country sound so completely that even the most hardened critics couldn't deny his talent. But talent alone hadn't gotten him through the door. The path had been cleared decades earlier by Deford Bailey, the Grand Ole Opry's first black star. Bailey's harmonica playing had helped build the Opry's audience in the 1920s, but segregation laws eventually forced him off the show. His legacy lived on through musicians like Obie McClinton and Stoney Edwards, who kept pushing against country music's color barriers through the 1950s and early 60s. Chet Atkins and Jack Johnson had spent 2 years secretly developing Pride's career, testing songs in small markets before taking them national. They knew one misstep could end everything. During those early days, Pride played small clubs where promoters billed him as Country Charlie. Some audiences walked out when he took the stage, but those who stayed found themselves won over by his deep baritone and genuine love for the music. Ray Charles took a bolder approach to breaking country music's color barrier. He walked into his R&B-focused studio and recorded modern sounds in country and Western music. The album shocked Nashville not just because Charles was black, but because he dared to reimagine country standards. He added orchestral strings to I Can't Stop Loving You, turned You Don't Know Me into a soul ballad, and proved country music could sound both sophisticated and soulful. But Charles paid a price for his success. Country radio largely ignored the album, despite its massive sales. When he tried to book shows in country venues, many refused. Some stations even organized boycotts of his music. The message was clear. You could record country music, but that didn't mean country music would accept you. Pride faced similar resistance, but his strategy of perfect adherence to country traditions slowly wore down the barriers. By 1967, he was performing regularly at the Grand Ole Opry. White artists began speaking up for him, most notably Willie Nelson, who once stopped a show to confront an audience member making racist comments. Baron Young threatened to cancel shows at venues that wouldn't book Pride. Behind the scenes, Pride was making another kind of history. While other artists trusted their managers blindly, Pride studied every contract, every publishing deal, in every royalty statement. He built Chardon Music into one of Nashville's most successful publishing companies, buying up song catalogs when other artists needed quick cash. His business acumen proved that true independence meant controlling your business as well as your art. As Pride racked up 29 #1 hits, he opened doors for other artists of color. Linda Martell became the first black woman to play the Opry, though her career was cut short by industry resistance. Mexican-American singers like Freddie Fender and Johnny Rodriguez brought their heritage into country music, scoring hits with bilingual songs that expanded country's cultural boundaries. The impact went beyond just who could perform country music. Pride's success forced the industry to confront its own prejudices. Radio stations that had sworn never to play black artists found their audiences demanding Pride's music. Music Row executives who'd claimed white audiences wouldn't accept a black country star watched as Pride's albums went gold and platinum. But while Pride was breaking down racial barriers, another group of artists was challenging country music's gender rules. In a small radio station in 1966, Loretta Lynn handed over a song that would make many stations pull their hair out. Little did they know, this coal miner's daughter was about to start a revolution that would change country music forever. Loretta Lynn walked into her radio station holding a record that would make grown men blush. The Pill wasn't just another country song. It was a declaration of war against every unwritten rule about what women could say in country music. Station managers pulled it from the airwaves, but they couldn't stop every housewife in America from singing along. Lynn wasn't a newcomer to controversy. Years earlier, she'd released Rated X, a scathing critique of how divorced women were treated in rural communities. Then came Wings Upon Your Horns, tackling the taboo subject of lost innocence, and Dear Uncle Sam, one of the first songs criticizing the Vietnam War. Nashville's old guard had tried to silence her then too, but Lynn understood something they didn't. Country music's female audience was tired of hearing only the male perspective. This rebellion had roots stretching back to the Carter family, where Mother Maybelle Carter had quietly revolutionized the business side of country music. While male artists focused on radio hits, Maybelle secured publishing rights and developed merchandising deals. She taught her daughters the business, creating a template for female independence that would influence generations. The modern revolution sparked when Kitty Wells recorded It Wasn't God Who Made Honky-Tonk Angels. The song was a direct response to Hank Thompson's hit, blaming women for every man's bad behavior. Radio stations banned it, the Grand Ole Opry forbade Wells from performing it, and male artists complained it was disrespectful. It shot to #1 anyway, spending 6 weeks at the top of the charts and proving that women's voices could sell records. Jean Shepard took the fight to the road, becoming one of the first women to demand headlining slots on major tours. When promoters tried to pay her less than male acts, she walked away from shows. Her stance inspired a young Brenda Lee, who crossed over to pop music while still a teenager, proving female artists could build multi-genre careers without waiting for Nashville's permission. But it was Dolly Parton who turned breaking the rules into an art form. When Porter Wagoner hired her as his duet partner, everyone expected her to play the traditional role of the female sidekick. Instead, she used the platform to build her own empire. She wrote hit after hit, banking every dollar she could. While male executives underestimated her because of her looks, Parton was studying publishing rights and entertainment law. The breaking point came when Parton decided to leave Wagoner's show. He'd made her a star, but she'd outgrown the role. Instead of a quiet departure, she wrote, I Will Always Love You, turning their professional split into one of country music's greatest songs. Then she did something even more revolutionary. She refused to let Elvis Presley record it unless she kept the publishing rights. When Colonel Tom Parker demanded half the publishing, Parton said no, a decision that would later earn her millions when Whitney Houston recorded the song. Behind the scenes, these women built informal support networks, sharing information about unfair contracts and predatory industry practices. They warned each other about handsy executives and taught younger artists how to read contracts. This quiet rebellion was as important as their public stands. They were creating a parallel power structure outside the male-dominated industry. The cost of rebellion was high. Many radio stations enforced unwritten quotas, never playing more than a few female artists per hour. Program directors claimed their audiences wouldn't accept too many girl singers. Television shows would book these artists less frequently. Male artists would refuse to tour with women who didn't know their place, but these women had something more powerful than industry support. They had the ear of every woman who'd ever been told to stay quiet and smile. Barbara Mandrell took the rebellion mainstream, bringing country music to Vegas-style shows and primetime television. Her variety show, Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters, showed network executives that country music's women could draw national audiences. Tanya Tucker proved young women could sing about adult themes without apologizing, challenging the industry's double standard about age and gender. By the mid-1970s, women had carved out more than just hit songs. They'd created a new model for country music success. They owned their publishing companies, produced their own records, and controlled their own careers. The old Nashville compromise, success in exchange for submission, no longer worked. These artists had proven that authenticity, even when it made people uncomfortable, was the key to lasting success. But while these women were fighting for their voices to be heard, one man was using his voice to challenge the very foundation of country music's establishment. Johnny Cash walked into Folsom Prison with guitars and microphones, about to record an album that would horrify Nashville's elite. The Man in Black was about to paint country music in colors the industry had never dared to use. When Johnny Cash set up his microphones in Folsom Prison's cafeteria, the guards were nervous. Not just because they had a celebrity in their maximum security prison, but because Cash insisted on eating with the inmates before the show. The breakfast menu that morning, prison meatloaf, the same food the prisoners ate, but Cash wasn't there for a publicity stunt. He'd been playing prison shows for years, away from the cameras, often paying his own way. When prison officials would try to set up separate dining areas for his crew, Cash refused. When they offered to cuff the inmates during shows, he threatened to walk. While other stars avoided controversy, Cash walked straight into it. He saw himself in these men, a different turn of fate, and he might have been wearing prison blue instead of his trademark black. The resulting album, At Folsom Prison, sent shockwaves through Nashville. The raw energy, the dark humor, the way Cash treated prisoners like human beings, it all challenged country music's clean, family-friendly image. But Cash wasn't done breaking rules. He followed it with At San Quentin, where he performed San Quentin twice because the inmates cheered so loud they demanded an encore. The guards stood nervously as 2,000 prisoners stomped and shouted their approval. Behind the scenes, Cash fought even bigger battles. He took on the Nashville establishment over Native American rights, producing an entire album about the brutal history of indigenous peoples when Columbia Records tried to talk him out of it. Bitter Tears, Ballads of the American Indian, cost him airplay and support from conservative radio stations, but Cash promoted it anyway, taking out a full-page billboard ad challenging the industry's cowardice. But Cash's real rebellion came on his TV show. When ABC gave him a primetime slot, they expected safe entertainment. Instead, Cash turned his platform into a protest stage. He gave Bob Dylan his first major TV appearance when other country shows wouldn't touch folk singers. He fought to have Pete Seeger perform despite the blacklist. When sponsors threatened to pull out over his Native American rights episodes, Cash told them to find another show. He featured black artists at a time when country TV was strictly segregated. The Man in Black wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a statement. Cash wore black for the poor, the beaten, the prisoners, and the soldiers in Vietnam. His song Man in Black laid it out plainly. He'd wear color when injustice ended. Nashville executives squirmed, but they couldn't argue with his sales numbers. Every time they tried to rein him in, his audience grew larger. Cash's legacy of rebellion didn't die with him. A new generation of artists was watching, learning that country music could tackle society's darkest corners. They'd take these lessons and push even further, bringing country music into places its founders never imagined. The rules Cash broke would stay broken, but the new rebels would find fresh barriers to tear down. Chris Christopherson landed his helicopter on Johnny Cash's lawn in 1969, a demo tape in his pocket. The former Rhodes Scholar and military captain wasn't following any country music rulebook. His songs about failure, addiction, and broken faith would inspire a new generation of rule breakers who understood country music was ready for raw honesty. Today's rebels don't just break Nashville's rules, they question whether Nashville matters at all. Tyler Childers records psychedelic bluegrass albums without radio play, channeling ancient Appalachian sounds through modern psychedelia. Chris Stapleton looks more like a biker than a country star, singing blues-heavy country that would make Ray Charles proud. Sturgill Simpson turned down major labels to make a space-themed concept album, then followed it with pure bluegrass just to prove he could. These artists found strength in their outsider status. Stapleton played in bluegrass bands and wrote hits for others before exploding into stardom with a voice that defied genre boundaries. Childers refused to water down his Kentucky accent or his radical politics, building a devoted following through relentless touring. Simpson used his success to record a tribute to his grandfather's coal mining roots. Proving commercial freedom lets artists honor their heritage more authentically. Some break rules by returning to traditions Nashville abandoned. Jason Isbell writes story songs that echo Christopherson's literary ambitions, tackling sobriety and privilege, with unflinching honesty. Brandi Carlile brings back the high lonesome sound of Appalachia while singing openly about LGBTQ+ life. Morgan Wade keeps her small-town Virginia accent thick while singing about mental health and addiction, topics Nashville once buried in metaphor. The biggest rule breakers might be the ones Nashville never saw coming. Lil Nas X took Old Town Road straight to TikTok when country radio rejected it. The song became the longest-running #1 hit in Billboard history, forcing country music to confront its relationship with race once again. Beyoncé brought R&B swagger to the CMA Awards with Daddy Lessons, reminding everyone that country music's roots were never pure in the first place. Just like that rhinestone revolutionary who shocked the Opry in 1952, every new generation finds its own ways to shake up country music. Porter Wagoner's sparkly suit seems tame now. But somewhere tonight, in some small club or on some social media platform, another rule breaker is about to change everything again. The only question is, are you ready for what comes next?